Hey everybody, welcome to Positive Podcast. I have a very, very special guest on the show today. I have Doug Bender from I Am Second. Doug, thank you so much for taking time to join us.
I am really glad to be here. It's good to talk with you.
Man, I really appreciate you taking time. I was looking at your schedule. I'm watching and searching you. You have interviews going on all over the place.
Yeah, I get plenty of good chances to get to talk to folks about what we do and really the story of what God is doing in lives all around the world. God is still doing stuff, and I just get excited I get to talk about it.
Our entire message here at Positive Podcast is all about encouraging and inspiring people. We all have different moments in our lives where things are rolling really good, but I think we can all admit that there are times when things get really tough.
Yeah.
And when things get tough, we try to fix things on our own. It's our human nature. Well, I can just make it through. I can fix this. It'll eventually go away. And sometimes it makes things more difficult. But being part of I Am Second, your production has done stories on people and about how they came to their faith in God.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. When I first saw your invite to join you, I looked into your podcast a bit, and I saw that the things you're trying to say is the things we've been trying to say too. So very much that idea that we all have different struggles, we all have different issues in our lives, and we all have different ways we try to cope with them. But that's exactly what they typically are. It's a coping mechanism. But the only way to true healing, really that path through the struggle, not just to survive the struggle itself, but the way through it is knowing who you are in relation to God. And that's really where we have landed, is helping people get that concept that when Jesus becomes first in your life, you find that path, that journey to healing begins there.
You know, I remember my early walk in my faith. Prior to accepting Christ in my life, I was in control. I was the God.
Yeah.
I'm just being humble and honest here.
Yeah.
I was in control of my destiny, and nothing else could stop me. Even if there was a God, he couldn't control me. I was in control.
Yeah.
And boy, he let me go for a long time. And eventually I fell, just like everybody else you probably have done your stories on.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting that we all, at least most of us anyway, have to hit that rock bottom point before we come to that realization.
Yeah.
Any understanding or any thought of why that happens?
You know, I think the thing about God is, and we see this in many of the stories throughout the Bible, and that many times when he's speaking, it's in a whisper. It's not in the shouting. And so it's not that he's not talking to us and trying to give us the path through. It's that we're not listening. And we typically only, and this is typical, but typically we're only really listening when things get really bad. And that's when we hear God. And sometimes we perceive that and think, oh, now God is talking to me now that I'm in this space. But in fact, he's been talking the whole time. And we're only then in those moments of listening that we can hear him.
Boy, that's another solid point. Obviously, I can see why you're a part of I Am Second in the production team here. You have a lot of experience. I learned in life, and I was given this advice by somebody at one time, but they said the best way to become a good teacher is to become a good listener. And that was hard for me to do. People that know my background, I've owned a business at a very young age, and I was always used to being in control, and I wasn't very good at listening for a long time in my life.
Yeah.
I'm still working on that.
Yep.
But the more I listen, the more mature I become and the better I'm able to help people. With I Am Second, though, you have done some massive stories and you have a lot of people that you have interviewed. I know there's probably many that stand out to you, but Brian Welsh is one of them that everybody probably approaches you and talks about.
Yeah, it's a great one. In fact, that was one of our early ones. Brian Welch from Korn fame. And he was certainly one of those ones that had the rock bottom situation, that he went the whole rock star, drugs, and mess of a life situation to finding Jesus. The way Brian Welch describes it, he said, it's when you follow Jesus, it's kind of like being a pumpkin on Halloween, right? Where, you know, to make that pumpkin a jack-o'-lantern, you first have to cut it open with a knife. Then you have to scrape out all that gunk in the middle, cut holes in it, and only then can you put a light in there to shine.
Wow.
And he said, I had a lot of that in my life. I had a lot of that gunk that needed scraping out when I started following Jesus. And he talks about it. He goes, I didn't know how to be a father. I didn't know how to run finances, simple things. I just didn't know how to live life following Jesus. So there's a lot of that scraping out. And I think that's so true. I mean, all of us have that. You know, and we think following Jesus is this easy, simple thing. And it's certainly the easiest of all options, but life simply is not easy.
Mm.
You know, so it's not that Jesus is promising that he's going to be harder than the rest. It's that life is harder. There's challenges we all have to face. He is the one that can bring us through them and can bring us to the point where he can then shine a light through us. And I think that's a beautiful thought.
But why do you think I myself and others have a hard time wanting to follow Jesus? I remember me personally.
Yeah.
I thought it was a boring lifestyle. I thought,
Yeah.
oh man, these people that follow Jesus, it's so boring. I can't do anything wrong. And I was wrong because when I accepted Christ into my life, I felt that freedom that I had never felt before.
Yeah.
But why is it that you think people have a hard time accepting Christ into their lives?
You know, it's interesting. One of the stories we shared is from Stephen Baldwin. You've probably all seen him in various movies. Famous actor who is now famously following Jesus. Really loves Jesus. And he was one of those stories where he'll even say, he goes, many people think maybe I hit this rock bottom because he was in the drugs and he was into the whole Hollywood lifestyle and he was deep into that. And people think, oh, maybe he just hit rock bottom and needed Jesus to get out of it. He goes, that wasn't my story. I didn't hit rock bottom. My life was great. It was the best life I knew how to have. For him, what really hit him was he was seeking an adventurous life. He wanted, what is that path in life that can give me that? And he found that this world simply is the boring one. That Jesus is really the one that can give you an adventure, a challenge, a path, not just even in this life, but into the next. And that is what gravitated him. Jesus was not, sometimes we make him boring, but when you read him, he is anything but. He stirred the pot, he rocked the boat, he really shook people. He was the adventure. And when we follow him, he has made it very clear that if we indeed do what he says and follow in his footsteps, the world won't like us because we too will then have to be rocking the boat. Us too will be on an adventure the rest of the world says that's too much. And I think that's a cool thing that he's actually, we can make him boring, but that's only when we misunderstand him.
Watching some of the videos, I watched a lot of them, a lot of famous people, but I got to be honest with you, I was really drawn to your interview, your first interview, and obviously your second interview was a little bit different than the first.
Sure.
But I remember you talking about a kid feeling lonely. You felt like you must have had some, you were very self-conscious.
Yeah.
You mind talking about that a little bit?
Yeah. I moved around a lot as a kid and kind of had to restart those friendships a lot. And it got to a point where I became very lonely. I started to doubt myself because if I didn't, without having friends and not knowing how to make friends and that makes junior high and high school awkward anyways, but then adding to this that I'm just struggling socially, I start having a lot of self-doubt. It's like, well, maybe they don't like me. Well, maybe they don't like me because I look funny, or maybe they don't like me because I talk funny. And so these doubts became more than doubts. I started to actually believe them and thinking, yeah, there's things wrong with me. God messed up when he made me. I don't think I ever said those words, but I think I believed them. And that really affected even how I viewed God. I started to wonder, well, if these people don't like me, maybe he doesn't either. Maybe God doesn't like me. I mean, I know he loves the world and all, but maybe he doesn't really so much think about me. And that really affected me. I think that thinking process started when I was a bit younger. For my 12th birthday party, I invited a few friends from school over, and nobody showed up. And it's a simple thing. It's just a birthday party. At the end of the world, that's not a big deal. But for me, it was a big deal. And it started this chain of thinking that maybe God doesn't like me. Maybe nobody likes me. And I kind of carried that with me for a long time. And then I was about to turn 16, so several years later, and my mom insisted I have another birthday party, and so I do my best to self-sabotage so that I can then perhaps blame myself rather than people not liking me, right? Again, I'm not thinking this stuff out loud, but as I look back, I think that was what's happening in the back of my head. And so I invite two people to my party, and I invite them the day before. So there's no heads up. I'm not sending out invitations. My mom said I had to have a birthday party. Sure, I'll invite a couple friends over. Not thinking anybody would show up. You know what? God filled my house that day. I had so many people in my living room that we had to move the party to the backyard. Now, I had a small living room, so maybe it wasn't as big a crowd as you're thinking. But for me, if it was anything more than one person, I was going to be thrilled. And he filled my house with people. People brought their friends. And I remember kind of in the middle of the party, I walked outside on my front porch, and I said, God, I have been praying to you one very simple prayer for a long time, many years. And I'd cry myself to sleep with this prayer. And the prayer was, God, I want a friend. I want one person who cares about me, one person who listens to me, who's concerned about the things in my life. I just want one person, one friend. And I told him in that moment, I said, God, I don't know how I did it, but I missed it. This whole time, you were the friend. This whole time, you cared about me. You were concerned about what's happening in my life. You liked me, wanted to meet my needs. You were there. And I confessed that moment. I said, God, I have been a terrible friend to you. I don't like going to church. I don't like reading my Bible. I don't like talking to you in prayer. I've been terrible, and you have been there for me. And I committed that day a couple of things. I said, number one, I want to be a better friend. And a simple thing, I didn't know exactly what's it mean to be a good friend to God. I said, God, I don't really know what that looks like, but I figured it'll start by me like reading about you, trying to learn a little bit more about you. So I decided to read my Bible. I'd never really done that. And I committed to another thing. I said, God, the other thing is I don't think most people know what I just discovered. I grew up in church. I grew up hearing about you. And somehow I had missed that you love me. I think there's a lot of people out there that don't know that. And so I told him right then, I said, I don't know what this looks like, but I want to spend my life telling people that you love them. That's what I want to do. I don't know I didn't know what it meant to be in ministry. I didn't know about pastors or anything like that. I certainly didn't know I'd one day write a book called I Found Love. But I figured whatever path he had ahead of me, people needed to know that God loves them. And so that's really what has brought me even to this moment and wanting to continue that message that God indeed loves you. And that to me, that changed everything.
That's a very powerful story. I know there's so many people, especially with a pandemic in full swing, the loneliness, that feeling of no value or no worth. And, I remember being self-conscious as a kid about my appearance. And I was very quiet. I didn't want to be around other people. And now here I am hosting a podcast. So God had bigger plans than
Yeah.
was even able to think of as well. But, your second story, your first story is very powerful. And thank you so much for sharing that. The second story, I'm going to be honest with you, blew me away because I know you a little behind the scenes here. You and I have known each other for a couple years.
Yeah.
And I watched you and your family come through the church, and I saw your children. But I had no idea some of the news that you had been given during that time. Do you mind sharing some of
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, it was interesting. It really began. I was working with I Am Second, had been for a few years. I was in the middle of writing some books for I Am Second. In fact, I had. It was my wife was pregnant and she had a sonogram scheduled. It was like the one where you find out whether it's going to be a boy or a girl, which is generally about weeks 18 to 20. So you're halfway through the pregnancy. You're pretty excited. You've been telling people you got a baby at that point. And well, I had two things happening that day. On the same day, I had two book deadlines for I Am Second. I had to turn in a first draft of one of the books called Live Second, where I'm going to try and tell people how to follow Jesus, right? And I had a final draft, like going to the printers of another book called I Am Second. And I said, Kath, I'd love to be at the sonogram. I got to go I literally have 2 book deadlines on the same day, which if anybody's listening and they're an author, don't do that. It's a bad plan. Tell the publisher you can't turn 2 in at the same time.
And don't tell your wife no.
Right. Also, go to the sonogram. But I didn't know that at the time, so I didn't go. And but I'm working through my final edits on one of the books, and I get a text from my wife that the sonogram did not go well, and that the sonographer said, "quote the baby is not compatible with life." And well, I turned in that book with a few extra typos in there. I just shut it and went to go be with my wife. As we kind of journeyed down that, we went to doctors and specialists, and the basic end of the line thing was we sat in the specialist doctor office, and he sat us down. We had one child at the time. He looked at us and he said, "I've been doing this a long time. I'm a leading figure in the field. I write some of the research papers, kind of thing." He goes, "I know what I'm talking about. What I'm about to tell you is it's legit." And he basically said, he goes, "I don't know how you had your first child. The only way I can tell you had the first child is that it was an Abraham-Sarah situation," was the words he used.
Wow.
He's a man of faith. He believed in the Bible and believed in the story of that God gave that couple a baby when they were well past the ability to do that. He goes, "And the only way you're going to have more kids if God decides to do it again."
Wow.
And well, at this point, he's done it a few times since then. I mean, I have 4 kids. In fact, we have a 5th on the way.
Wow.
Yeah. So me and God had some tough conversations while we were kind of journeying through that. But at the end of the day, he also chose to heal, chose to bless us with more kids.
Not to take any credit away from the medical community, please.
Yeah.
I am thankful for the doctors and the people that we have to turn to help us understand some of those difficult times we're going through. But it proves to me that ultimately God is in charge, regardless of what anybody says. And we have done some pretty tough stories. I've gone through some pretty tough interviews. We're working on an interview right now that we're in the editing process of. It's probably one of the toughest ones I've ever done. But the family clings to God, and regardless of what the doctors and the news that they gave them, they cling to their faith in God, knowing that He has a plan and a purpose for their life.
You know, one of the stories that really, stories from the Bible that really spoke to me in those moments was the story of Jesus right before he goes to the cross. And he has a moment with the Father about whether he should go to the cross. And he has this prayer. And in that prayer, he basically, the Son of God tells the Father, "I'm not a big fan of going to the cross. If there's any other way," is his words, he wants to take another path. Being tortured on a cross for the world to see is not a great way to go. And even Jesus wanted another way. But in the end, he trusted the Father's plan and said, "But not my will, your will." And I think it took me some time. I think Jesus got to it a lot faster than I did. But I had to come to that same point with God. And that I remember telling him very clearly, I said, "God, I think this plan is a bad one." I told him, I said that. I said, "God, I don't know what you're planning on, but us not having kids, and then we had a miscarriage, and then we had a stillborn child. And I said, I think this is a bad plan. But I knew enough about God to also realize that in previous times, whenever I thought he had a bad plan, it turned out to be a good one. I just couldn't see it at the time. So I had to also say, in the same moment I said, I think this is a really bad plan, I had to come to the point where I said, but I'm going to trust that you'll fix this.
It's hard to do at that point in time.
It is.
Isn't it?
It wasn't an easy thing. And even right now, with many kids later, I'm still missing 2.
Yeah.
And I still have to say, you know what? I still think the better plan was to have all of those kids. But I'm going to trust that God has a plan and he will one day fix that. I don't know how, but I'm just going to trust that.
It's the only place you can go.
Yeah.
And he has proven himself over and over again that you can trust him.
Yeah.
When you were talking about some of the things you're going through and the conversations that you have with God, I myself have had some tough conversations. And I have asked why so many times. And I know I'm not the only one, there's many people. And I would cry out. Sometimes I would shout out in anger, "Why are you doing this to me?"
Mm,
I remember losing my dad
mm,
after a period of time that I had been following Christ for a long time. And I
yeah.
thought, boy, following Jesus, this is awesome. I felt great. I
Hmm.
felt like everything was going my way. And then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
instantly, my father was gone. I never had a chance to say bye to my dad. I never had a chance to
Mm,
say that I love you one more time and some of those things that I wish I would have.
yeah.
And I remember shouting out to God, "Why? I have done everything you've asked me to
Mm,
do. I followed you. I loved you. I talk about you. I share my story. Why, why, why?"
yeah.
And he didn't answer me right away.
Yeah.
But he didn't shut me up either. He didn't shut me off. He let me have my moment. He let me cry out.
Hmm.
And I think what I learned during that time was he's a God who desires a personal relationship. When you have a friend or a family member or somebody that you're very close to, think about it. Every conversation isn't sitting on a cloud going, "Hi,
Right.
how's things going?"
Right.
There are some tough times during that relationship and some tough conversations.
Mm,
But when he let me go, when he let me vent, he let me go for a long time, and I was discouraged, but I didn't walk away from him.
mm,
I still, I was clinging on to whatever I could, even though I was struggling tremendously
yeah.
with the loss that I dealt with. Um, but after a period of time, he finally did answer me,
Mm,
and I kept asking, asking, asking. He said, "Because I wanted him home."
mm.
That was what I
That's big.
heard from God. And that, when I heard that, I kind of felt guilty
Hmm.
because I thought I felt selfish. I wanted my dad,
Mm,
but God gave me that quick, I wanted him home.
yeah.
And now going through a pandemic and living in the world that we live in and all
Yeah.
this craziness, in a sense, I'm glad my dad is home, not going
Mm,
through some of this,
yeah.
But that challenge, I think that it's okay to be real with God. He
Yeah.
desires that.
Yeah. In fact, when I um, read through the prayers of the Bible, I hear a lot of that in those prayers. I mean, there's certainly the praise prayers. God, you're great. God, you saved us. God, you fixed us. God, you healed us. But there's a lot of those. God, where'd you show? Where are you?
Yeah.
God, are you going to do anything? Are you listening? Are you there? There's a lot of that too. I find the book of Psalms very comforting in those moments. There are certainly psalms that are all about the praise. But there's also those psalms that start in some very dark places.
Yeah.
God, I'm not hearing your voice. God, I'm having all this stuff in my life and you're not showing up. God, I need you to show up. Where are you at? Are you listening? And the fact that God decided to record that and write that down and have us be able to read and interact with that, I think is Him telling us, hey, let's talk. And let's not just talk about the good things happening. I want to talk about all of it. And I find that encouraging, honestly. Number one, that means He actually cares. Otherwise, he would just say, can you just please go do something else? Get over it. I also find it encouraging to know that most of the great heroes of the faith didn't get their big prayers answered. Think about it. There's even a chapter in the book of Hebrews that's all about that. And it lists through like all the big heroes of the Bible and says, yeah, well, Abraham was promised a nation. He got like a kid.
True.
Yeah, David was promised a throne that would never end, and then he died. He just goes through all these heroes of the faith that never saw those promises, those prayers answered. And the point being that God is bigger than just our little lifespan, that He continues to be God well after someone passes away. And those promises He made are still kept. It's just His time scale is a little bit different than ours.
Yeah.
I've had that conversation with God too. I'm thinking, God, I know you have a plan. I just kind of wish you'd tell me a little bit more about it.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what the plan is here? Because I don't see it.
Yeah, it is. And it's a struggle. But what I find when I do that, he does tell me eventually.
Yeah.
That's what's crazy. It just
Hmm.
doesn't come in my time frame.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's he's got a time frame, and he doesn't always. Sometimes he'll even adjust it for us and say, "All right, I'll tell you."
Yeah.
But a lot of times he says, "Just wait. I'll tell you when it's time."
Yeah.
Which, looking back now, I'm really happy because there's stuff that's happened in my life. I think, yeah, I'm glad he didn't tell me that ahead of time. That would have been rough.
Everybody has a story. And I think people look to famous people to hear their story because you're intrigued by their lifestyle
Hmm.
and how what their background is, what their story is. But sharing your story, I think, alleviates that weight that you carry.
Yeah.
You feel that way? I
Oh,
mean,
certainly.
when you can be real and honest with people instead of putting on that fake
Yeah.
image, there's something that's freeing about that.
Yeah. Yeah. The Bible uses perhaps religious language to describe it, but this idea of confessing your sins, right? This idea that when you speak out loud your struggles, your issues, there is a healing that happens just in the speaking out loud of it.
Mm.
It's not going to wipe it all away, but it begins this process. Especially as you tell it more and more, and as you start to experience that healing, the story grows, right? Because maybe when you first started saying, "Hey, I had this struggle over here," you were still in the midst of it.
Right.
I remember we had a guy, David McKenna, was the early interview guy we did, had a lot of struggle with alcoholism, but God was walking him through that. And so we scheduled an interview with him, and he came in, and we did the interview, and he flew back home. I think he lived in Florida. Anyways, the very next day after we interviewed him, he calls us, and he basically says, "So I just feel like you need to know that I'm still in the middle of all this. Like, I'm not healed. He's trusting God to heal him, but he's like, I just don't want you guys to feel like you need to publish that story because I don't want to embarrass you because I'm still struggling with alcoholism. I'm still in it." And our basic response back was, "Yeah, I know. That's why we're telling you this, telling your story, because God is not just with us at the end when we're all better.
Yeah.
He's with us in the beginning and in the middle and all throughout." But a lot of it starts, yeah, with speaking out loud the things God is doing in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you accept Christ in your life and you become a follower, um, things don't go away. Those battles still are there, whether you're struggling with alcoholism or any other addiction that you're facing. That temptation is always there fighting
Hmm.
to get your attention. But he wouldn't have died for us if we were perfect, right?
Yeah,
If
exactly.
we could just accept him and then we became perfect people, I think that's a misconception of the Christian faith that people
Yeah.
think that, and sometimes we do a bad job
Hmm.
showing people who Jesus is.
Yeah, perhaps it's as Jesus said that he didn't come for the righteous, he came for the sinner.
Yeah,
And that's one of the things we have tried to do from the beginning is telling the sinner's story. So we tell those unrighteous stories, to use religious language. We tell the stories of people that they're still pretty messy. They're on this path. God is healing them. God is working through with them, but they're still in the middle of it. Because if we're really honest, we're all in the middle of it. Any story that denies that has failed to tell the true story. So we have always endeavored to tell the messier side of these stories. This was even true of the latest book I wrote called I Found Love. Um, and there we tell the story of God healing relationships, marriages, families, friends, giving people a sense of belonging and community. And while all of those stories tell how God is healing those relationships, they also all reveal that they're still not perfect, that those relationships still have a tension and a struggle with them. Now, we trust God that He's going to finish the good work He began. If He's begun to heal, He will continue.
So if people want to find out about I Am Second, I highly, highly, highly encourage you to watch some of the videos. YouTube, they can find you, but iamsecond.com.
Yep, that's the best place. You'll get all sorts of stuff there. imsecond.com. You'll see our films. We've got a free downloads, or if you want to have a small group discussion, or you want to figure out how to read the Bible. And we even got a free live coach, spiritual coach, who, if you have questions, if you want to figure out, like, how do I follow Jesus exactly, we literally have somebody that can walk you through that. And they're never going to sell you anything. It's just they're going to tell you, here's how to follow Jesus. So yeah, that's where you go.
That's awesome, Doug. There is so much more that you do as an individual, and I want to save that because I would like to invite you back to the studio sometime.
I would love that. I
if
would
you're
love
up
that.
for it. Awesome.
Always.
I know you're a busy man. You got a busy schedule. 5 kids. I know you're going to be working on 6, 7. I don't know, whatever. But we'd love to have you back. But Doug Bender, thank you so much for taking time to join us today. It's been a pleasure having you here in the studio.
Pleasure to be here.